The night I heard my late husband's voice coming from the basement, my hands froze around the mug of tea, and for the first time since they lowered his coffin into the ground, I felt true fear instead of grief. It was his voice, not something similar, not a memory echoing in my head. It was him, the exact low rasp that used to crawl into bed beside me after long shifts, the voice that said my name like it was a secret only he was allowed to know. Harold always dragged the last syllable, soft and tired, like he was already halfway asleep. I heard that same sound rise up through the floorboards, slow and unmistakable. Evelyn. I stood in the kitchen, the clock ticking far too loudly, the house holding its breath with me. My knees weakened so suddenly I had to grip the counter. Harold had been dead for 3 years. 3 years of quiet mornings alone. 3 years of talking to his photograph like a foolish old woman because the silence felt crueler than pretending he could still hear me. The basement light was off. It always was. I avoided that place like a wound that hadn't healed. That was where he collapsed, right on the concrete floor. His heart giving out while he was sorting through boxes he never finished unpacking. I hadn't gone down there since the paramedics carried him past me, zipped into a black bag that smelled faintly of antiseptic and finality. Evelyn... The voice came again, clearer this time. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe the television. Maybe a neighbor's radio drifting through the vents. But I hadn't turned the TV on, and the neighbors were gone for the winter. I lived in a quiet, aging neighborhood where most houses held widows like me, women waiting for time to finish what loneliness had started. I told myself I was tired. That grief does strange things to old minds. But my feet moved anyway, slow and unwilling, toward the basement door. Each step down the staircase felt like walking into memory itself. The smell hit me first, dust, damp cardboard, and something faintly metallic that made my stomach tighten. The single bulb flickered weakly when I pulled the chain, casting long, accusing shadows across boxes labeled in Harold's handwriting. Then I heard breathing, not imagined, not remembered, real uneven breathing coming from the far corner. Harold! My voice cracked like brittle glass. The breathing stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but the buzzing light and the sound of my own heart thudding painfully against my ribs. I thought I might faint right there and join him in whatever cruel illusion my mind had built. Then he spoke again. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. That sentence, those exact words, were what he used to say whenever he broke something or forgot an anniversary. It was him down to the bones of my memory. My chest ached with a longing so fierce it hurt to breathe. "I miss you," I whispered, tears slipping free before I could stop them. "I've missed you every day." There was a pause, too long, too measured. "I know," he said softly. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. Harold was many things: gentle, absent-minded, stubborn, but he was never careful with his words. This voice sounded rehearsed. I took another step forward, then another, my slippers whispering against the concrete floor. The shadows shifted, stretching tall and warped across the walls. In the corner, behind a stack of old Christmas decorations, Something moved. My breath caught painfully in my throat. "Come closer," the voice said. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee upstairs, lock the door, and call someone, anyone. But grief has a gravity of its own. It pulls you toward things that hurt because they remind you that once you were loved. And then I saw him, or something wearing his voice. The figure stepped into the light, and for a split second, a hope exploded in my chest so violently I thought it might kill me. Same height, same shoulders, same thinning gray hair, but the eyes were wrong. Harold's eyes were warm, endlessly patient. These were sharp, restless, watching me like I was something to be studied rather than cherished. The man standing in my basement looked younger, too solid, too alive. I staggered back, the world tilting. "Who are you?" I whispered. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite regret. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," he said, still using my husband's voice. "But you were never supposed to hear me." The basement suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in like a secret finally exposed. My knees buckled, and I sank onto an old storage crate, my body trembling uncontrollably. "My husband is dead," I said, clinging to the words like a lifeline. "I buried him." The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "you did." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things unsaid. Somewhere deep inside me, a terrible understanding began to form, one that made my grief feel naive, almost foolish. "I didn't come back to haunt you," he continued quietly. "I came because the truth doesn't stay buried forever." And as he stepped fully into the light, I realized with a sickening certainty that the night Harold died was only the beginning of something far darker, something he had hidden from me for decades, something that was now standing in front of me, breathing, waiting for me to finally see it. The basement light flickered again, and I knew my life, the one I thought I had lived honestly, was about to be rewritten forever. My heart hammered so violently I could feel it in my ears, drowning out everything else. I stared at the man standing in front of me, my mind clawing for some explanation that didn't feel like madness. The voice was still Harold's, wrapped around every word like a cruel disguise, but the face, oh, the face was a stranger wearing pieces of my husband like borrowed clothing. "Stop using his voice," I said, my hands shaking as I pushed myself upright. "You don't get to use it. You don't get to sound like him." He flinched at that, just slightly, and for a moment I saw something like shame cross his face. But it passed quickly, replaced by something colder, more resolved. "It's the only way I could make you listen," he said. "If I'd knocked on your door as myself, you would have called the police, slammed the door, pretended I didn't exist." My throat tightened painfully. "Who are you?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than any answer could. People pause when the truth is heavy, when it has edges sharp enough to cut both speaker and listener. "My name is Daniel," he said finally. "Daniel Harris." "Harris! My married name." My legs nearly gave out again. That's not possible," I whispered. "Harold and I, we couldn't—" "You couldn't have children," he finished for me, his voice gentler now, almost apologetic. That's what he told you. The air felt thin, like I was breathing through cloth. I remembered the appointments, the white rooms that smelled of disinfectant, the way Harold squeezed my hand when the doctor spoke in careful tones. I remembered the grief we carried home together, quiet and shared, or so I thought. "You're lying," I said, but the word lacked conviction. "If Harold had a son, I would have known." Daniel's mouth twisted sadly. "You weren't supposed to." The basement seemed to tilt, memories rearranging themselves in my mind like puzzle pieces that suddenly fit too well. Harold's unexplained trips, the cash withdrawals he brushed off as errands, the locked drawer in his desk he never let me open. "You came here," I said slowly, each word heavy, "to tell me you're his—" What? Ghost? Secret? Punishment? His shoulders sagged. "I came because I'm tired of living like a lie, and because the house is being sold." That snapped something sharp and angry inside me. "This is my home. For now," he said carefully. But Harold left it to both of us. The words landed like a physical blow. "He wouldn't," I said. "He couldn't." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, edges worn soft from handling. He set it gently on a box between us, like an offering. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Papers had power to make things real. "He updated his will 6 months before he died," Daniel said. "I didn't know until after the funeral. I wasn't even allowed to attend. He said it would complicate things." My vision blurred. Harold had collapsed 6 months later. 6 months of knowing death was creeping closer. 6 months of putting his affairs in order without me. I heard his voice. I whispered, more to myself than to Daniel. I thought he was calling me. He swallowed hard. He used to record messages, voice memos. Sometimes I play them when I'm here. It helps me feel closer to him. A cold understanding slid into place. The breathing, the pauses, the careful words. "You're living in my basement," I said. "Not living," he corrected softly. "Hiding, until I figured out how to talk to you." Rage flared, hot and sudden, cutting through the fog of grief. "You don't get to hide in the place where he died. You don't get to haunt me with his voice." "I know," he said, eyes shining. "I'm sorry. I never meant to scare you." "But you did," I snapped. "You scared me half to death." Silence stretched between us, thick and fragile. I looked at him again, really looked, the curve of his jaw, the familiar crease between his brows when he frowned, the way his hands moved, nervous and precise, Harold's hands. "How old are you?" I asked. 32. My breath caught. That meant Harold had been unfaithful barely 5 years into our marriage. 5 years after vows spoken in trembling voices, 5 years after promises whispered in the dark. "Who was she?" I asked quietly. Daniel's gaze dropped to the floor. "A woman named Ruth. She worked with him briefly. It ended quickly, or that's what he told her. She raised me alone. He visited when he could, paid for school. But he never put his name on my birth certificate. So I was the life he showed," I murmured, bitter understanding blooming in my chest. and you were the life he hid. He looked up at me then, eyes red. He loved you. He talked about you all the time, said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. I laughed a hollow, broken sound. Love doesn't look like this. The basement light flickered again, and I felt something inside me crack open, old and raw. I had mourned a man who never fully existed. I had loved someone capable of building entire worlds behind my back. I don't know what you want from me, I said. Daniel took a shaky breath. I want to stop being a ghost. I want to know where I belong. I looked around the basement at the boxes, the shadows, the place where Harold took his last breath, and realized that whatever belonged here was already dead. You can't stay here, I said firmly. I know, he replied. But before I go, there's something else you need to hear. My stomach twisted. What? I asked. Daniel reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small, battered recorder. His thumb hovered over the button. This, he said quietly, is the last thing he ever recorded. And it wasn't meant for me. As the recorder clicked on, and my husband's voice filled the basement once more, I knew the truth I was about to hear would hurt far worse than the lie I had already lived. The sound of that recorder clicking on felt louder than thunder. My whole body stiffened, every nerve screaming at once, because the voice that poured out of that small plastic box was not a memory anymore. It was present, living, filling the basement the same way it used to fill our bedroom late at night when the lights were off and the world felt safe. Evelyn, Harold's voice said, worn and tired, like it had been scraped straight from his lungs, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the courage to tell you myself. My knees gave out completely this time. I sank onto the cold concrete floor, my back against a stack of boxes I didn't recognize, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Daniel froze where he stood, watching me like he was afraid I might shatter if he moved. I don't know how to begin, the voice continued. I've lived most of my life pretending I was a better man than I really am. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help. His voice wasn't coming from outside me anymore. It was echoing inside my chest, stirring every year we spent together. I betrayed you, Harold said softly. Not just once, and not just with another woman. I betrayed the truth of who I was. A sob tore out of me, raw and humiliating. All those years I defended him. All those times people said no one was perfect, and I nodded like wisdom lived in my bones. I had no idea how wrong I was. I convinced myself I was protecting you, he went on, that if you never knew, you wouldn't be hurt. But lies don't disappear just because we refuse to look at them. They wait, they grow teeth. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't stop the recording. His eyes were glossy now, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. I have a son, Harold said. His name is Daniel. He didn't ask to be born into secrecy, and he didn't deserve to grow up feeling like a mistake. I let out a sound that didn't feel human. My heart felt like it was tearing in two, one half mourning the man I loved, the other raging at the stranger who wore his face so convincingly. I should have told you when the doctor said we couldn't have children, Harold continued. I should have told you every day after that. But I was a coward, Evelyn, and cowards confuse silence with kindness. The basement felt smaller by the second. I could barely breathe. When my heart started failing, his voice said, quieter now, I knew time was running out. I'd tried to fix things on paper because I couldn't fix them with words. I split the house. I left instructions. I told Daniel to wait, to be patient, to give you time. I looked up at Daniel sharply. You were supposed to wait? His voice trembled when he answered. I tried, I swear I did. But the house was being inspected. I had nowhere else to go. And then tonight, you heard the recording. Harold's voice broke through us again. If you're angry, you have every right to be. If you hate me, I earned it. But please, please don't punish him for my sins. Tears streamed freely down my face now, soaking the collar of my sweater. You bastard, I whispered, though I didn't know whether I meant the voice or the man standing in front of me. You left me with this mess. I loved you, Harold said, his voice cracking for the first time. In my own flawed way. You were my home. I just wasn't brave enough to live honestly inside it. The recording clicked off. The silence afterward was unbearable. It pressed against my ears until they rang, until I thought I might scream just to break it. Daniel stood frozen, the recorder limp in his hand, like he'd just dropped something fragile and irreparable. I laughed, then soft at first, then louder, the sound sharp and unsteady. All these years, I said, I thought grief was the worst thing a person could carry. I was wrong. Daniel knelt a few feet away from me, careful, cautious. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said, surprised to find that I meant it. That's the cruelest part. None of this was your doing. I studied his face again, really seeing it now. The lines around his eyes, the familiar tilt of his head when he listened. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a monster. He was a man shaped by my husband's cowardice. Your mother, I said quietly. Is she alive? He nodded. She passed last year. Cancer. Another quiet casualty of secrets. I don't know what Harold expected, I said, pushing myself to my feet with aching limbs. That I'd hear his confession and suddenly become generous, grateful? I don't expect anything, Daniel said quickly. I just needed you to know. And I needed to know you. Those words settled strangely in my chest. I had spent decades thinking my life was finished, closed like a book with no blank pages left. Yet here I stood, confronted with a future I never imagined, bound to a man who shared my husband's blood, but none of my memories. You can't stay in the basement, I said again, softer this time. That place belongs to the dead. He nodded. I'll leave tonight. I hesitated, then surprised myself. You don't have to leave the house immediately. There's a guest room. We'll figure something out. His eyes widened. You don't have to do that. No, I agreed. But I'm tired of pretending silence is peace. We climbed the stairs together slowly, each step heavy with unspoken history. At the top, I paused, my hand resting on the doorframe. The house felt different now, less haunted, somehow, but more honest. I heard his voice, I said quietly. And it terrified me, but the truth is what finally woke me up. Daniel nodded, understanding etched into his face. As I turned off the basement light and closed the door, I realized something startling and painful and oddly hopeful all at once. My husband was truly gone now, not because his voice had stopped echoing, but because his lies no longer lived in the dark. And for the first time since his death, I felt something close to freedom. Sleep did not come that night, not for either of us. The house creaked and sighed the way it always had, but every sound felt newly charged, like the walls themselves were whispering, "You finally know?" I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. Harold sighed untouched, cold, a permanent absence shaped like a man. Down the hall in the guest room, Daniel moved restlessly. I could hear his footsteps, soft and uncertain, like he didn't trust the floorboards to hold him. I wondered if this was how Harold felt all those years, hovering at the edge of truth, never fully at rest. Just before dawn, I gave up on sleep and padded into the kitchen. The kettle screamed when I turned it on, startling me. My nerves were raw, stretched thin by memories that kept resurfacing uninvited. Harold standing behind me while I cooked, Harold humming off-key, Harold kissing my temple before work, already carrying secrets in his pockets. When Daniel appeared in the doorway, pale and hollow-eyed, I almost didn't recognize him. In the harsh morning light, the resemblance to Harold was impossible to ignore now. It felt cruel, like the universe rubbing salt into an open wound. "I can leave if you want," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." I wrapped my hands around my mug, letting the heat steady me. "Sit," I said. "Running away won't undo anything." He obeyed, perching at the edge of the chair like a guest, afraid of overstaying his welcome. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The kettle cooled. "Did you know?" I asked suddenly. "About me, I mean. Did he ever tell you who I was?" Daniel nodded slowly. "He showed me pictures, talked about you like you were sacred." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "That's one word for it." "He said you saved him," Daniel continued, "that you made him want to be better." I laughed quietly. Wanting and doing are very different things. The words hung between us, heavy but honest. I studied Daniel's hands as he wrapped them around his own cup, noticing how they mirrored Harold's long fingers, a slight tremor. That tremor used to worry me. I used to remind Harold to slow down, to take his medication. Had he been trembling with guilt all along? "Why now?" I asked. "Why come into my life like this?" He swallowed. "Because the house is all I have left of him, and because I'm tired of feeling like I shouldn't exist." Something in his voice cracked me open. I knew that feeling too well, the sense of being unnecessary, invisible. Widowhood had shrunk my world until even my own shadow felt like an inconvenience. "You exist," I said softly. "Whether I like how you came into this world or not." His eyes filled, but he blinked it back. "That's more than I've ever had." After breakfast, I went into Harold's study for the first time in years. Dust coated the shelves, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and regret. Daniel hovered in the doorway, unsure if he was allowed inside. "Help me," I said. "If we're going to untangle this, we start here." Together, we opened drawers I'd never touched, boxes I'd avoided like landmines. Letters spilled out, some addressed to Ruth, others to Daniel, unsent drafts, filled with apologies and justifications. I read until my eyes burned. Harold had been terrified of losing me, terrified of being seen for who he really was. And in that fear, he built a life that depended on deception. I don't know how to forgive him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to, Daniel replied. He's not here to hear it anyway. That truth stung more than I expected. Harold had escaped consequences by dying. The rest of us were left holding the wreckage. By afternoon, exhaustion settled deep into my bones. I sat on the couch, clutching an old photo album. Daniel sat across from me, silent. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. I looked up, startled. "No." "Resent me?" I considered it carefully. "I resent the lie. I resent the years I spent thinking my loneliness was fate, not choice. But you?" I shook my head. "You're collateral damage." His shoulders sagged in relief. That evening, the doorbell rang. I froze. Daniel stiffened. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," I said slowly. I opened the door to find a woman in her late 40s standing on the porch, her coat pulled tight around her. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, sharp and assessing. "Evelyn Harris?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Margaret," she said, "Harold's sister." My heart dropped into my stomach. Margaret and I hadn't spoken in years, not since she accused me of keeping Harold to myself. At the time, I thought she was bitter. Now, I wondered if she knew more than she ever let on. "I heard Daniel was here," she said flatly, "and I thought I should finally stop pretending this family isn't broken." Daniel appeared behind me, his face draining of color. Margaret's gaze softened when she saw him. "You look just like him," she murmured. "I always wondered when you'd come." I turned slowly. "You knew?" She sighed, stepping inside uninvited. "I knew enough. Not the details, just enough to be complicit." Rage surged through me, hot and electric. "All of you knew," I whispered. "And you let me live a lie." Margaret met my eyes, shame etched deep. "Harold begged me not to tell you. Said it would destroy you." "It did," I snapped. "Just later." Silence fell heavy again. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the living room, shadows shaped like secrets finally dragged into the light. And as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of Harold's carefully constructed world, I realized the real haunting wasn't his voice in the basement. It was the living truth, knocking at my door, demanding to be faced. Margaret sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. The house seemed to recoil around her, as if it remembered old arguments and swallowed insults. Daniel stood near the doorway, unsure where to place himself, like a child caught between adults who had failed him long before he ever knew their names. "I didn't come to fight," Margaret said finally, her voice brittle. "I came because this was bound to happen eventually. Harold always thought he could outrun the truth." I let out a slow, shaky breath. "And you helped him." Her eyes dropped. "I helped my brother survive. Or, so I told myself." I folded my arms, feeling suddenly ancient, every year of my life pressing down on my shoulders, while I planned a future that never existed. Margaret nodded, accepting the blow. He was afraid of losing you, afraid you'd leave if you knew. I laughed softly, the sound tired and hollow. He lost me anyway. He just didn't live long enough to see it. Silence settled again, thick with regret. Daniel shifted his weight, then spoke hesitantly. Why didn't you ever tell me about her? Margaret looked up at him, eyes shining. Because I thought it wasn't my place, and because once a lie lasts long enough, everyone starts pretending it's mercy. Her words struck painfully close to home. I had built my own mercies, routines, habits, quiet evenings that were really just ways to avoid asking questions I didn't want answered. Margaret stood. I'll leave you to it. I just wanted you to know you weren't stupid, Evelyn. You were loved. Just not honestly. After she left, the house felt emptier than before, as if even the air had decided to abandon us. Daniel and I stood there for a long moment, neither of us knowing how to move forward now that another layer of truth had been peeled away. I think you should stay a few days, I said suddenly. Not forever. Just until we both catch our breath. He looked at me like I'd offered him something sacred. Thank you. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I returned to the basement alone. I don't know why, perhaps to prove to myself I could. The air was cold and still, the boxes unchanged, the shadows obedient now that I knew what made them move. I stood where Harold had collapsed. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply stood there, letting the weight of reality settle fully into my bones. You should have trusted me, I whispered to the empty room. I was stronger than you thought. For the first time, the basement felt like just a basement. Not a tomb, not a mouth whispering lies, just a room where something ended. The next few days passed strangely, like life was teaching me how to walk again with a limp I hadn't known I had. Daniel helped around the house quietly, respectfully. He fixed a loose hinge, carried groceries, never overstepped. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. One afternoon, I found myself watching him from the kitchen window as he raked the yard. Harold used to do it the same way, methodical, focused. The sight hurt, but not the way it had before. This pain felt cleaner, like a wound finally exposed to air. Did he ever talk about dying? I asked that evening. Daniel shook his head. Only once. He said he was afraid of leaving things unfinished. I smiled sadly. He succeeded. A letter arrived, the following morning official, stamped, heavy with consequence, the executor of Harold's estate, paperwork, deadlines, decisions. I sat at the table for a long time before opening it. Daniel watched me quietly, prepared for whatever answer I might give. I've decided something, I said at last. He stiffened. Okay, I'm not selling the house, I continued. Not yet. And I'm not dividing it either. He looked confused. Then what? I'm giving you Harold's share. His breath caught. You don't have to. I know, I said gently. But I want to. Not because he asked, because I choose to. Tears spilled down his face unrestrained now. I don't know how to repay you. You don't, I replied. You live. Honestly, that's enough. We signed the papers a week later. When it was done, Daniel packed his things. The guest room felt strangely hollow as he carried his bag to the door. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "If you want to," I said. "This story doesn't have to end in disappearance." He hugged me, then careful, grateful, real. Not as a son, not as a stranger, just as two people shaped by the same flawed man. After he left, I walked through the house slowly, touching walls, door frames, memories. I realized something then, standing in the quiet. Harold's voice hadn't come from the basement to trap me in the past. It came to force me out of it. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No voices, no echoes, just silence that felt earned. And when morning came, I opened the curtains wide and let the light in ready, at last, to live in a house that belonged fully to the truth. The house did not feel empty after Daniel left. It felt finished, like a sentence that had finally found its period. I moved through the rooms slowly that first morning alone, half expecting grief to ambush me again, but it didn't. What came instead was something quieter and far more unsettling. Clarity. I stood in the hallway outside the guest room, the door now open, the bed neatly made. For decades, I had believed my life's great tragedy was losing my husband. Now I understood the truth was far more uncomfortable. I had lost myself long before his heart failed. I had shrunk my questions, dulled my instincts, silenced that small voice that used to whisper, "Something doesn't add up." And yet, here I was, still breathing, still standing. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Harold's funeral. I went to the cemetery. The sky was pale, undecided, like it couldn't choose between grief and forgiveness. I brought no flowers. I had spent too many years decorating lies. I stood over his grave with my hands clasped behind my back, my spine straight not out of respect, but resolve. "I heard your voice," I said aloud, "and it broke me. But it also freed me." The wind stirred the trees gently, indifferent to my reckoning. "I loved you," I continued. "I truly did. But love without truth is just devotion to a stranger. And I'm done being devoted to ghosts." For the first time, I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away. Life, I discovered, doesn't return all at once. It comes back in fragments, small rebellions against the past. I painted the living room a lighter color. I donated Harold's clothes instead of preserving them like relics. I learned to cook meals meant for one without apologizing to the empty chair across from me. Daniel called once a week at first, then less often. Not out of distance, but growth. He found an apartment, a job he liked, a life that belonged to him. Sometimes he'd ask questions about Harold. Sometimes he wouldn't. I answered honestly when I could and said I don't know when I couldn't. That, too, was a kind of healing. One evening, months later, I returned to the basement one final time. I carried nothing with me, not a memory, not a recording, not even anger. I flipped the light on and looked around. The room was unchanged, but I was not. I went to the far corner where Daniel had hidden, where fear once lived thick in the air. "I forgive you," I said, not to Harold, not even to Daniel, but to myself. For believing love meant silence. I turned off the light and closed the door, not carefully this time, not ceremoniously, just normally. That was when I realized the shocking truth of it all. The voice I heard that night, the one that terrified me, was not my husband haunting me. It was my own intuition, screaming loud enough to finally be heard. Years later, people would ask how I survived widowhood, how I stayed strong. I never told them about the basement, or the voice, or the lie that split my life clean in two. I simply smiled and said, I learned the difference between loneliness and freedom. Because I did not lose my husband that night, I lost an illusion, and in its place, I gained something far rarer at my age, a future that finally belonged to me. People assume endings arrive with certainty, with slammed doors, dramatic speeches, or one final, satisfying answer. But my ending did not come like that. It arrived quietly, months after the truth, when the house no longer startled me at night, and the silence stopped feeling like a threat. It came the evening I realized I no longer spoke to Harold's photograph. I noticed it while dusting the mantel. His frame was still there, but my lips stayed closed. No updates about my day, no whispered complaints, no habit of pretending he could still hear me. I simply wiped the glass and moved on. That absence startled me more than the voice in the basement ever had. I sat down slowly, the weight of it settling in my chest, not pain, not relief, but acceptance. Harold was not watching anymore, not judging, not listening, and for the first time, I didn't need him to. A week later, I received a letter from Daniel, handwritten, careful. He told me about a promotion, about a woman he'd started seeing, someone kind, someone who asked questions and expected real answers. He thanked me again, not for the house, but for giving him a beginning that wasn't rooted in shame. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer, not with Harold's things, but with mine. Spring came gently that year. I planted flowers where Harold never let me said they were too much work, too messy. I chose bright colors, bold ones. I let the dirt stain my hands and felt proud of it. Life, I learned, was allowed to be untidy. Neighbors notice changes. They always do. You seem lighter, one of them said over the fence. I smiled. I finally put something down. They didn't ask what. At night, I slept with the basement door unlocked. Not because I expected anything, but because I no longer feared what lived below. There were no voices, no echoes, just pipes, dust, and a past that had lost its grip on me. And yet, sometimes rarely, I would wake before dawn with a strange calm humming through me. In those moments, I understood something that would have terrified my younger self. The dead don't haunt us. The truth does. I thought back to the woman I used to be, the one who dismissed her doubts, who mistook endurance for virtue. She wasn't weak. She was loyal. She was loving. But she believed survival meant silence. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't warn her. I wouldn't beg her to look harder or leave sooner. I would simply tell her this: you are allowed to know the whole story. That night, the night I heard my late husband's voice from the basement, was not a curse. It was an invitation to stop worshipping a version of love that required me to disappear, to stop protecting a man who never protected the truth, To stop confusing familiarity with safety, Harold didn't rise from the dead. What rose was my awareness late, yes, but still in time. I am an old woman now, my hair thinner, my hands slower, but my life is finally my own. I choose where my memories live. I choose which doors stay closed. I choose honesty, even when it arrives wrapped in grief. And if there is one thing I know for certain, it is this. The night I heard my late husband's voice was the last night I lived in fear. Everything after that, every quiet morning, every honest breath was freedom finding its way home. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house once it has finished teaching you what it needed to teach. Not the lonely quiet I once feared, but a settled one like an old friend finally sitting down after a long walk. That was the quiet I woke up to now. It didn't ask anything of me. It didn't demand memory or explanation. It simply existed. I stopped marking time by grief. Days became days again, not anniversaries of loss. I woke when my body told me to, not when dreams startled me awake. I learned the small joy of doing things without justification, reading in the middle of the afternoon, letting dishes wait, laughing out loud at the radio without feeling foolish for being alone. Sometimes, when the light hit the hallway just right, I would remember Harold as he truly was, not the man I defended for years, not the liar revealed too late, but a complicated human being who loved me imperfectly and feared honesty more than death. That memory no longer made me ache. It made me thoughtful. Forgiveness, I learned, is not something you give to someone else. It's something you stop withholding from yourself. Daniel visited once more, a year after he left. He stood on the porch looking nervous, holding a small box. Inside was an old watch Harold's. Daniel said he couldn't keep it, said it felt wrong to carry time that belonged to another life. I took it without ceremony and placed it in a drawer when he left, not as a relic, just as an object that no longer ruled me. We hugged goodbye, and I knew without sadness that we were not meant to remain close. We had shared a reckoning, not a future. That was enough. That night, I dreamed of the basement one last time. In the dream, the light was on. The boxes were gone. The floor was clean. There were no voices, no shadows shaped like men, just empty space. When I woke, I smiled. Because dreams don't lie the way people do, I am often asked by well-meaning strangers, by distant relatives, by women who sense something in my stillness if I ever regret not knowing sooner. The answer is no. If I had known earlier, I would have broken in ways I was not yet strong enough to survive. Truth arrives when it must, not when we demand it. Mine arrived late, but it arrived whole. I sometimes think about that night, the fear, the sound of his voice rising from beneath my feet, how my body knew before my mind did that something was wrong, how intuition doesn't knock politely. It rattles the foundation. If you are listening to this story and wondering what I would do differently, let me tell you something important. I would still love. I would still trust. But I would never again ignore the feeling that whispers, "Pay attention," because love that demands your silence is not love, it is erasure. I live alone now, and I am not lonely. That distinction took me a lifetime to learn. My days are quieter, yes, but they are mine. I answer only to truth now. I let it speak, even when it trembles. The basement remains just a basement. Pipes hum, dust gathers. Nothing waits in the dark. The voice I heard that night did not belong to the dead. It belonged to the woman I had buried while I was still alive. And she rose, not screaming, not accusing, just finally awake. That is my ending, not tragedy, not horror, but the long-delayed moment when fear loosened its grip and truth at last let me go. I did not expect peace to feel so ordinary. That was the strangest part of all, not the voice, not the secrets, not even the betrayal, but how quietly peace slipped into my life afterward. No announcement, no apology, just a slow settling, like dust after a long storm. I began volunteering at the library twice a week. Nothing grand, just shelving books, helping children find stories with happy endings. I liked being surrounded by truths that admitted they were fiction. It felt honest in a way my marriage never had. Stories that said, "This is made up," instead of lives that pretended they weren't. One afternoon, a young woman asked me how long I'd been married. The question caught me off guard. My mouth opened, ready to give the old answer, 43 years, but the words didn't come. "I was married," I said instead. She smiled kindly. "I'm sorry. I surprised both of us by shaking my head." "Don't be. It taught me who I am." That was new, and it felt true. At night, I sometimes replayed the moment I first heard the voice, not with fear anymore, but curiosity. I wondered what would have happened if I'd ignored it. If I'd told myself it was imagination, grief, age. I could have gone back upstairs, locked the door, and continued living inside a carefully padded lie. Many people do. But something in me had already grown tired of pretending. That night, I chose terror over denial. And that choice, small and shaking, changed everything. Daniel sent me a photo once. He was smiling, standing in a sunlit kitchen that wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time. He looked happy, unburdened, like a man no longer apologizing for his existence. I whispered, "Good," and meant it. I stopped visiting the cemetery after a while, not out of anger, just irrelevance. Harold no longer lived there for me. He lived in lessons now, in warnings, in the quiet wisdom of knowing that love without truth is not safety, it's sedation. On the anniversary of his death, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. No rituals. No tears. Just a long look at the life still unfolding outside my glass. A neighbor's radio played faintly somewhere down the street. For a moment, a brief, treacherous moment, the voice sounded like his. My heart didn't race. I smiled, because I knew the difference now. There are voices that come from basements, hidden places where truths are stored because we're afraid to face them. And there are voices that come from within, rising when silence has done enough damage. That night, they met, and only one of them survived. If you're listening to this story and waiting for the part where I tell you everything turned perfect, I won't lie to you the way I was lied to. Life did not become easier. Aging did not reverse. Loss did not disappear. But fear did. And fear, I learned too late, but not too late is the most expensive thing we ever carry. I no longer jump at sounds in the dark. I no longer soften my questions to protect other people's comfort. I no longer confuse endurance with virtue. I live truthfully now, quietly, fully, and sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the world feels far away, I place my hand over my heart and listen, not for ghosts, not for echoes, but for myself, because the night I heard my late husband's voice coming from the basement was not the night he returned. It was the night I finally did. And this life I am living now, unafraid and awake, is the ending he never gave me, but the one I chose for myself.